My name is Xiaoyue Ni, and I'm right now an assistant professor in mechanical engineering and material science at Duke University. And so my group works mainly on programmable materials and flexible electronics, which is highly related to our today's topic, which is smart manufacturing. And so all of the speakers like we are inviting today has expertise in the smart manufacturing and also programmable or like intelligent metamaterials. And so it's our greatest honor to invite speaker Yifan Wang from Nanyang Technology University, and Ke Liu from Peking University, and Wenjie Zhou from California Institute of Technology. And so we are also having our panelist Mengdi, Professor Mengdi Han from Peking University to join us for the discussion. And so welcome and good morning and good afternoon and good evening, because I hope like we have all the audiences from the entire of the world. And so I'll give the stage to our speaker. First of all, Yifan, Professor Wang from Nanyang Technology University. And he is actually a rising star in this field of smart manufacturing and metamaterials. And he has published many like high impact journal in many high impact journals, such as Nature and Nature Materials and Physical Review Letters. And so he actually graduated from University of Chicago with a PhD in physics. And prior to joining Nanyang in 2020, Dr. Wang worked as a postdoc fellow in Department of Mechanical Engineering and Civil Engineering at California at Caltech. And so he's the associate editor of Mechanics of Materials journals and have won numerous awards, including Healthy Longevity, Global Grand Challenges Catalyst Award, and Nanyang Assistant Professorship Award, and Gringer Foundation Graduate Fellowship in Experimental Physics, etc. And so let's welcome Yifan for his wonderful talk. Yeah.
Thank you, Xiaoyue, for the introduction. So let me share my screen. And thanks for the invitation to give this presentation for today. So hopefully everyone can see my screen here. So, okay, so my presentation is, the topic is about robotic metamaterials with programmable shape-morphing and stiffness variation. Okay, and as introduced, I'm from Nanyang Technological University, from School of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. So in this first page, you are seeing a few examples of the metamaterials that we have created that has programmable mechanical properties, such as morphing shapes and controllable stiffness. So I will introduce them during today's presentation. First is a brief introduction of mechanical metamaterials. All right. So mechanical metamaterials, as many of you may know, is an emerging field, and basically is a material that has intrinsic solid properties together with a controlled cellular structure. So for example, on these images, you are seeing a few examples of the metamaterials. Basically, they are structured lattices or lattice materials. So you can control the structure inside and for desired properties, for desired mechanical properties such as this, all right? And thanks to the additive manufacturing or 3D printing technologies, we are able to print them today as we designed for, from various kinds of materials like this. However, one of the limitation is that for this type of mechanical metamaterials, once we fabricate them, their properties are typically fixed. So on this material property space, once we make a material, they can fill one dot on this property space. However, if we want to tune their properties, usually by making one lattice or one material cannot achieve tunable properties this way, right? So the question is, are we able to create mechanical materials that has tunable mechanical properties? Instead of filling just one point, it can fill up either a line or area in this graph, okay? So why do we need this? So the reason is that if we look at today's there is a well-known interaction that is the human with machines, right? If we look at the mechanical properties of humans or human tissue, such as skins, is typically on the lower modular side. So these are typically soft materials that are existing in biological systems, and their modulus is typically on the lower range of below 1 gigapascals. On the other hand, machines, like artificial machines or robots, they are typically made of rigid materials, right? So their modulus is typically above gigapascals or even more. So usually there will be a gap between the mechanical properties of biological systems and these traditional machines. So in order to bridge this gap, if we create metamaterials with properties that is tunable, for example, metamaterials with stiffness or modulus that can bridge this gap, it can enhance safer interactions between the humans and the environment. Imagine that we put the metamaterial as a wearable system, right? It can become either rigid or soft, depends on the type of interactions that you want. And also, we can create robots and machines that is able to adapt these different environmental conditions on determining whether it wants to be soft or it wants to be rigid, all right? So let's see an example of how nature achieves this or biological systems achieve this, right? So in the nature, we can see a lot of materials or systems or structures that has changing mechanical properties. For example, the sea cucumbers is a well-known creature that can change its own body stiffness upon external stimuli. So for example, when there is no stimuli, the sea cucumber can be soft. However, when there is an external touch on the body, it can turn stiff for self-protection. And this is due to mutable collagenous tissue inside that is well studied. In the other example, for elephant trunk, for example, it can use a hydraulic system to change from a soft state to a rigid state to pick up heavy items or return to the dexterous state to pick up very fragile objects. And more examples, for example, the pangolin scales, right? Pangolin scales, when the muscle is not in contraction, it is flexible to move. However, when it has predators nearby, it can contract its muscles. So the scales will contract to stiffen the body as a protective mechanism. So all these examples in biology tells us that there could be possible ways of creating materials that can change from a soft to a stiff or rigid state to provide protection or assistance on demand. And that will be the main goal of my research for today. Okay. So for today's outline, I will be talking about mainly two topics. The first topic is to create structured active fabrics that has stiffness, which is controllable for different applications, especially for wearable applications such as soft exoskeletons. On the second topic, I will be mainly introducing a bio-inspired multifunctional software robot that is capable of different functionalities using the metamaterial design. Okay, so for the first topic, so I will be briefly go through this paper as it has been published in 2021. I imagine that many of you may have seen this work. So the main idea behind it is that we have designed and created a 3D printed structured fabric that is able to control the stiffness. So the basic idea is that we are designing this interlocking structures basically is similar to a chainmail link, right? So when we design this interlocked particle geometry, and we can 3D print it using selective laser sintering technology, basically imagining that you're 3D printing an interlocked chainmail layer. And upon fabrication or manufacturing, they can have very little bending stiffness, just similar to a chainmail link, right? And however, it could have high tensile stiffness because each of these individual units are connected by the topological interlocking. And also, due to its hollow internals, the density is going to be very low. So the whole material is going to be lightweight. It's similar to a piece of fabric that you make for normal wearable materials. And the interesting feature we find is that when we pack 2 layers of these fabrics and confine it with boundary state, an interesting phenomena called jamming transition will happen. So this is similar phenomena as you go to the supermarket and you see the vacuum packed rice or beans, right? Due to this vacuum confinement, the 2 layers of this fabric will be jammed together to increase its stiffness drastically. So you can see that in the soft state, it's flexible as a fabric. However, when we use a confining pressure to confine it by an elastic bag, it can turn up its stiffness by 1 to 2 orders of magnitude to be able to hold a large weight. And also, more interestingly is that when it is in the soft state, it is soft and conformable. Then what we can do is to conform it passively to a certain geometry or a mode and apply this negative vacuum pressure to freeze it into the state. So it becomes a reconfigurable structure that can change its geometry to different configurations while still being able to hold a large amount of weight, right? So this is kind of passive shape reconfiguration. So the next work I will be introducing is that are we able to get rid of this passive shape reconfiguration? Because currently the shape changing needs us to put this material onto a certain geometry to conform it and then to freeze it into that state. And the question is, are we able to design the individual building blocks so that when we apply the stimuli, this whole structure is going to go to the shape that we programmed and also change the stiffness accordingly, right? So this is basically also inspiration from biology, right? You can see that biology has a lot of this type of biological armors from these discrete particles or discrete tiles that is connected by soft organisms, right? And the method that we are trying to do is that if we have a target shape or geometry that we want to achieve, for example, we want the fabric to become a certain geometry, we have a target, then we can perform a geometrical tessellation. Basically, we cut this geometry into individual tiles and then expand this 2-dimensional tiles into a 3-dimensional building block or such as this, right? And then we open it up and 3D print each of them into the fabric. So here is, for example, here's what we can do. For example, if we have a dome shape that is target, we can use mathematics or computation to calculate what each of these tiles should look like on its geometry. Then the next is that we can use 3D printing technology to print out each of the tiles. And then we can apply a trigger to it, right? So one way is similar to what we have shown before. We can put it in the elastic or soft envelope and apply vacuum to it. So these tiles will be contracted together to go to the programmed shape and then also turn stiffness accordingly. Okay. So using this mechanism, we are able to achieve the shape morphing of a various type of objects. For example, I have shown the a one-dimensional arc shape or one-dimensional hook shape that we are able to achieve. And also we can do it in 2 dimensions. For example, the dome shape, which has positive Gaussian curvatures, and also the saddle shape, which is a well-known structure for having negative Gaussian curvatures, right? And also, after it is triggered, it goes to the target shape and also becomes stiff at the same time. Okay, so also during this process, we find one more problem. For example, if we want to achieve complex 3D geometries, for example, this 2-dimensional dome shape, we figured that using this method, we are using this method, we are only able to achieve a small portion of this sphere. If we try further to morph it into a closed sphere shape, we find it to be very difficult. And the reason is very simple, right? You all know about this Gaussian theory. If we want to open up a three-dimensional sphere into a two-dimensional space, we have to create a lot of cracks or tears. For example, if you open an orange skin, right? When you open an orange, you have to break it, tear it, in order to accommodate the geometry change from 3D to 2D, right? If we are like this, we don't create any cracks or splits in this 2D. It's very hard for us to accommodate the geometry mismatch into 3D. So in order to achieve more complex geometries, what we can do is that we can introduce these cards such as kirigami, right? So we call it a hierarchical tessellation, which means we first cut it into these petals in the first step, right? Such as similar to a kirigami design. And secondly, for each petals, we tessellate into these individual building blocks. Then we are able to achieve geometries that is even more complex. And in this example here, instead of using the vacuum-driven or pneumatic-driven method that I previously introduced, we are using a different mechanism, which is basically using a tendon to drive these building blocks. For example, you can see that through these blocks or tiles, we have inserted some elastic tendons that by pulling these tendons, this structure will be assembled together. The particles will be put together to assemble into the shape that we have pre-programmed during the printing process. For example, we can form a closed sphere as an example, right? So upon that, due to this powerful tessellation technique, we are able to achieve a lot of other geometries. For example, positive and negative Gaussian curvatures like this, non-axisymmetric geometry, for example, like flower vessel, and also a concave chair like this. So these are very complex geometry that is difficult to achieve using traditional shape-morphing methods. And another important thing is about the mechanical property change. As I have introduced before, while we apply the tensile stress inside these tendons, the particles are put together and the stiffness are going to be increased by a lot. As we can see here, when the structure is assembled, we can apply a large amount of weight or load to it, and it can still become a elastic load-bearing structure, right? So more functionalities can be embedded into this structure. For example, for each of the tiles or the building blocks, we can put in functions such as electronics inside. Then we can connect this electronics using some flexible wires. Then in this way, we are able to create some electronic systems that can morph from 2 dimensions in 3 dimensions. And this is particularly useful because the manufacturing of traditional electronics typically is limited in 2D, right? So for example, if we write electric circuits, it's typically done in 2D. However, using this morphing technology, we can fabricate the electronic devices in 2D, and later on, we morph it into 3 dimensions to create a 3D electronic device. So next, we go to a problem that is responding to the question that I've asked before. Is it possible to make this material into something that is wearable, for example, such as an exoskeleton that can change from a soft, flexible state to a rigid state for protection or assistance? And here is what we can do. For using these tiles, that is architectures, which is the same as we introduced before. We can 3D print it, connect it with some actuating fibers, right? And then using this fiber actuation, we are able to actuate it from the soft fabric state to the rigid exoskeleton-like state, right? And due to the powerful tessellation and design strategies that we have introduced before, we are able to design and personalize this type of exoskeleton according to different body geometries. For example, we can do it for the neck, for neck support. We can do it for the wrist, for the elbow, for the knee. As long as we have target geometry, we can design these individual building blocks for it to be customizable and personalizable, right? After fabrication, we can embed this actuation and control strategies. For example, we can use a miniature motor to actuate these fibers to assemble and activate these individual tiles. And for example, in here, we are showing an exoskeleton on the elbow, which is actuated by a motor that is applying tension to these wires, right? When the motor is activated, the exoskeleton becomes from a very soft, conformable state to a rigid state that is able to hold the arm at a certain position, right? And we have made a control loop for this, for it to be able to control. And as you can see here, we have done some tests to use this exoskeleton to help the tester to lift up a certain amount of weight. And on the left figure, you can show that is the muscle activities. The blue one is the muscle activity when the exoskeleton is activated, while the other one is not activated. So you can see that it can reduce the muscle activity by a lot using this exoskeleton actuation. The whole exoskeleton is also very lightweight, only several hundred grams, which is totally wearable. So, okay, so for this topic, this is the end of the first topic, which I have introduced how to design and manufacture these active fabrics that can change from a soft, conformable state to a rigid, load-bearing state for personal assistance and protection. So the second topic, I want to introduce a different aspect, which is to create a multifunctional soft robot using the metamaterial structure design, right? And for the second topic, we are actually using a different strategy from the first, different design strategy. So for the first method, we used cutting a certain plane vertically into individual tiles and then connect them, right? However, in the second strategy, we are inspired by the natural scales in some animals like pangolins or fish. And these scales, if we have a surface with a certain thickness, the scales are splitted or tessellated in the horizontal direction rather than the vertical direction as the previous case. And how does the shape-morphing and stiffness variation work for this example? So the idea is like this. If we have a target surface with a certain thickness, what we can do is to draw some lines to split this surface in two, right? Some structured lines. And we can do that in 3D, basically using computer design, right? And then we can split it, and then we can flatten it to two planes. And the only thing that is special is that the periods of this top wave structured waves and the bottom structured waves are a little different. That's why it can conform to the 3D-dimensional curve. Because as you may know, in order to bend a certain plane into a curved surface, the top part and the bottom part, either one has to stretch or compress, right? That means the top and bottom periods of these structures are slightly going to be different from our design. Then we split, when we separate the top layer into the scale structures and attach it to the bottom layers, then we can form this structured layered surface. So using the target geometry, we can also do the same thing. From a target geometry, we can design the desired shape that we want. For example, this is a very simple hook shape that we can desire, and we can 3D print this layered structure. When we apply this trigger, which is a negative pressure or vacuum pressure in our case, which is similar as before, we can achieve this reversible Shape-Morphing, right? And similarly, we can apply this to a lot of complex geometries, both in 1D and 2D. And these movies show that the scaled layers can morph into these geometries reversibly. And once the morphing is in place, the structure becomes load bearing because now the two layers from top and bottom are now well engaged. The stiffness is going to be increased by a lot compared to only one layer. You can see this. So we have tested what is the stiffness change, right? So by applying higher and higher pressure, we can also see that the bending modulus and the stiffness is going to be increased by a lot. For example, after it's actuated, we can apply a certain amount of load to it for it to hold the weight. So this is a structure that can achieve programmable shape morphing and variable stiffness at the same time. So the next thing is that with these two features in our structure, we are able to create a software robot that is able to actuate and change stiffness simultaneously. For example, we can put these structured layers in 3 segments, 1, 2, 3. Each segment has a top and bottom surface that is both the scales are attached, which means we have 6 control degree of freedom, right? Because the top surface, bottom surface, and we have 3 segments. For each control, we can make it to bend to the certain direction for each of the segments, and we have the 2 directions for each layer to bend to. So on the bottom, by controlling these 6 chambers, we are able to create a crawling software robot on the ground. And also, this crawling behavior is also able to make it swim in the water as well. For example, like this, it can be amphibious, which means it can both be moving on the land and also swimming in the water, right? And besides that, there's a lot more functionalities thanks to this concurrent or simultaneous shape changing and variable stiffness at the same time. On this top, I show amphibious, which I have mentioned before. Secondly, it can be adaptive. For example, it can crawl into gaps with different widths because of its soft body intrinsically, right? And thirdly, it can become a change from a soft state to a load-bearing state to perform assistance or support. For example, if there is a barrier or obstacle, it can crawl onto it, form itself into a bridge for other objects to pass through because the body is also very rigid when it's actuated, right? And lastly, it can become protective. If there is anything, for example, this is an tail egg that needs protection, it can crawl all over it, form a protective shelter, and also be stiff at the same time. So if there is external impact onto it, it can protect the objects within sight. And one last example I'm going to show is that it is possible to also make these structures into an adaptive landing system for drone systems. For example, if we create a structure that can bend from a soft state into this curved state like this, it can become a soft landing system that absorbs energy, right? Because now this structure is like an elastic spring that when the drone is landing on the ground, it is able to absorb the energy on demand. And it can change its stiffness depending on the pressure that you apply to it. And more interestingly, this type of structure can also become a soft gripper at the same time. So it is both a landing system and also a soft gripper for the drone. So for example, this type of hook behavior is if there is any objects on the ground, it is able to bend it and pick it up and fly to another space. Okay. All right. So with that, so that's all the presentation I have made. And with that, I would like to make the summary and also the outlook. So what I've shown is that by leveraging this mechanical metamaterial design, by programming the geometries and properties of the building blocks, and also by utilizing advanced manufacturing methods such as additive manufacturing, we are able to create these programmable building blocks, making it into functional metamaterials, right? Which has capabilities such as stiffness change, stiffness variation. It can have active shape-morphing into the programmed target geometry that is conformable and customizable according to the target. And thirdly, we can also add this robotic control and sensing strategies to make it more functional for wearable robots, for example, and multifunctional robots as well, right? So that's the end of my talk. And with that, I would like to make the acknowledgement. So in Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, we are running this our lab called Robotic Materials Lab. So we are focused on creating materials and structures that is multifunctional for robotic applications. And we have some collaborators globally around the world, and these are the funding sources we currently have. And if you have any interests, you're welcome to contact us. And thanks. That's all my presentation.
Yeah, thanks so much for Professor Wang's wonderful talk. I mean, we joined we actually started our labs at almost the same time. And it's always impressive to see that how many papers he can publish, like especially in this like very early stages, right? Like in his own career. And so, and also he's absolutely the pioneer of the like how to say robotic metamaterials. And actually, I was hugely inspired by him when we were interacting back at Caltech about this like topic. So let me actually introduce our next speaker, Wenjie.
Thanks, Zhou.
Yeah, thank you. So Dr. Zhou is currently a postdoc researcher in the Department of Mechanical and Civil Engineering at Caltech too. And so he graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Nanyang University in 2016 and earned his PhD in Chemistry from Northwestern University. And so he has actually been a superstar, like basically publishing many like papers in high impact journals, including first or co-first authors in Science, Nature, Nature Materials, and Science Advances, PNAS, and so on and so forth. And so his postdoc research is focusing on automated design manufacturing, and he's recognized by many awards, including the very prestigious MRS Graduate Student Gold Award and the Chinese Government Award for Outstanding Self-Financed Students abroad, and also an Outstanding Researcher Award, and so on and so forth. Yeah, but with that saying, and I think his topic is going to focus on smart manufacturing via programmable assembly, which is more focusing on nanoscale. And so let's welcome Dr. Zhou, and let's listen to his talk. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Lee, for the fantastic introduction. My name is Wenjie. I'm a postdoc scholar at Caltech Mechanical Engineering. And today I'm quite honored to be invited to the youth talk session of ICANX. And here I'm going to share a little bit of my perspectives on smart manufacturing, which is going to be a little different, and in this case, in particular, by programmable self-assembly. So to begin with, I would like to start with something that is much higher level. So this is how we normally perceive the natural world through reductionism. And that believes that by dissecting the world around us in a smaller but more functional part, but more fundamental parts, we can gain a full picture of how the universe works. Reductionism actually guided our physics for centuries, but it can run into difficulties when dealing with another hidden dimension, and that dimension is complexity. Nevertheless, the emergence of complexity is very important to the world around us, because without it, a rock would be stiff, water wouldn't flow, a fish wouldn't be able to swim, and ants wouldn't be able to collaborate with each other. So it seems like emergence is that something extra when you gather a large group of simple objects, And it just seems to be something that is not yet completely understood by existing theories. Hence, the famous saying goes, more is different. And in fact, this difference can be leveraged for good. One example is the emergence of order or symmetry, and it can be actually commonly found in nature. Well, for example, order can be used to offer internal support and external protection. And it was found in some starfish. It has highly rigid ossicles made of hierarchical calcite crystals, and some phytoplankton grow their rigid shells into dodecahedral forms to protect themselves. And order can also be used to save material as well. The beehives usually create this hexagonal pattern, which they can safely hold maximum amount of honey while using the least amount of wax. And we have listened to the fantastic lecture from Professor Wang's talk that animal scales are also found to be symmetrical and that they offer the optimal mechanical property while being still flexible and saving materials. And the most interesting example must be how order and symmetry are used for camouflage. For animals such as squids, chameleon, or butterflies that are actually very good at hiding themselves by changing their colors on their skins or their wings. So if you look close enough, they almost always do so by arranging the micro patterns on their surfaces. So we're often inspired by nature, and constantly we're learning from nature, and ultimately we want to make things that are not just limited by what nature offers. And here comes the concept of metamaterials. The materials that are specifically tailored down to their microstructures such that they can have physical property that do not exist in nature. And one of the very exciting criteria, and arguably one with the longest history, is to control light with optical metamaterials, so that one can bend, reflect, and absorb light with a wide range of useful applications. That ranges from cloaking, detections, circuits, lenses, and in some cases, energy harvesting. However, these functions don't come easily. To obtain the judicious functions that I just mentioned now, the materials tend to require highly intricate nanoscale architectures, such as this fishnet architecture. It was designed to guide light very efficiently. And that brings huge challenges to the material fabrication problem. So one does have to acknowledge the remarkable engineering effort behind the marvelous top-down fabrication techniques that enables the current metamaterials, but at the same time, we must also recognize the limitations. Well, these top-down fabricated materials tend to be polycrystalline with a rough surface, which hinders the performance, and their designs tend to be limited to planar structures only. It can be extremely time-consuming for fabrication process if nanometer precision is needed. So in short, carving this material from top down is hard. It's very hard. But what about building them just like what we do in these beautiful architectures? And that, in short, covers the most important idea I would like to communicate today, building nano-architected nanomaterials block by block. So imagine you can build any arbitrary nanoscale architectures just like constructing these buildings, but in an even better way. We lack the bricks to build themselves, such that targeted nanomaterials can arrange themselves into just the structure that we want. Because when we consider nanoparticles as building blocks, we actually have a broad library where we can precisely control their sizes, shapes, as well as composition. And of course, the magical cement we're using here is something that borrowed from nature, DNA, the blueprint of life, because they can both serve as an identifier and connector. They only bind with each other exactly as what we programmed them to, hence programmable self-assembly. So we have the material building blocks ready, and the glues that stick them together also ready. To fully unleash the power of these highly defined nanoscale tools, we really need to think as an architect. By that, I mean to design and find way to build exotic, but also reasonable nanoscale architectures. Throughout my research, I try to use geometry to solve such overarching challenges through two perspectives. The first one is how can we precisely anchor nanoparticles with arbitrary surface-bound arrangement, and second is how can we predict and design the arrangement of nanoparticles that spontaneously form in a 3D space. Well, the solution I would give for the first challenge is through physical templating. which is a combination of top-down methods such as electron beam lithography and bottom-up method, which is DNA immediate assembly. So in short, we assemble nanoparticles with DNA onto a surface defined by the pores that we make using top-down methods. What's truly unique about this system is the fact that all the final structures are not just static. They're all reconfigurable, and we can leverage chemical, pH, or photoresponsive features that readily comes with DNA. So through a series of systematic investigations, we're able to find the ideal pore size for a certain size of nanoparticles, the relationship between the assembly yield and pore depth, nanoparticle concentrations, and rationalize all of them through models that we built, incorporating Langmuir absorption model and fixed diffusion models. And long story short, we know precisely the dimension required for a batch of nanoparticle to be anchored on the surface in a layer-by-layer fashion with high absorption yield. These robust advantages can be clearly appreciated through these multi-layer surface-bound nanoparticle architectures. We're able to stack up to 4 layers of nanoparticles with near perfect absorption yield as long as they have a stable standing position. With this out-of-plane control in hand, the next question is how far can we go in terms of arbitrariness and precision? How can we anchor nanoparticles with in-plane nanometer precision at the correct orientation that we desire? And the answer that we give here is to remove the diffusion process. It is very interesting because we found the thickness of template layer is smaller than the dimension of nanoparticles. Here, we no longer have to make a big pore for high absorption yield. This is because the diffusion barrier no longer exists, so we can focus on the absorption process alone. As a result, we're able to make pores much smaller with design shapes acting as traps that specifically grabs the target portion of nanoparticles that we want. And the comparative precision gained from this shallow template strategy can be clearly appreciated in these lateral and angular offset histograms, where we compare how much the nanoparticles drifted from where we designed them to be in a series of surface assembly of nanocubes. So in short, with shallow template strategy, we're able to arrange nanoparticles as close as 4 nanometers in between while having precise orientational control at any arbitrary distance. At this point, you may ask, what about nanoparticles that comes with more complex than cubes? So we designed the pore shapes here to reflect the cross-sectional outlines of the target nanoparticles and customize each pore shape with just the position and orientation that we want. For example, we can precisely anchor nanoparticles with one type of facet, such as this octahedron, so we just designed the template shape to be a triangle. And for nanoparticles with 2 types of facets, such as cube octahedron, we designed 2 types of template shapes, squares and triangles, for 2 types of 3D orientations correspondingly. And of course, we can also do nanoparticles that are concave, such as this concave dodecahedron. We just designed a star-shaped template to make sure it fits snugly into the pores. And finally, for nanoparticles that have low symmetry, but highly symmetrical facets, such as this decahedron or pentagonal bipyramidal shapes, we just customize this heptagon or dumpling shape to make sure there's only one preferred orientation. To demonstrate how powerful and robust our system is, we made an exemplary matter surface entirely out of nanocubes, over 700 micrometer squared area. Of course, we didn't just make those surface-bound structures because we can, but because there are a lot of unprecedented material functions unlocked thanks to our nanoparticle anchoring technique. And the first metasurface I show you was actually, in fact, designed to function as a tunable absorber, where it can change its light absorption behavior based on the gap distance from particle to particle and also to the surface. In this particular triangle cube sphere design, we can achieve a very large tunable range of light absorption, basically across all visible range. When the metasurface is at its original state, which is in aqueous solution, all the DNA between nanoparticles are expanded with an approximate length of 20 nanometers. But the second that we add ethanol to the surface, now every particle is pulled closer to the surface, as well as to each other, so the reflection color changes. And more importantly, this contraction and relaxation is highly reversible. It does not damage any part of the material. And the second metasurface that I showed was actually designed to be a tunable anomalous reflector. So where it reflects light normally, like any reflective surface would do, and when precisely, so basically in this case, they are these precisely arranged gold nanocubes are submerged in aqueous solution. But when we add ethanol to the sample, now every cube is pulled closer to the surface. Because this much enhanced plasmonic resonance, the surface now reflects light anomalously to an angle that is very different than the normal reflective surface. So just like the first example, this contraction and expansion under sub 20 nanometer are highly reversible. This induces a macroscopic change of material physical behavior, therefore enabling one single metasurface to function as two drastic kinds of different reflectors. Now with full control of programmable 2D arrangement in hand, we begin to think about the real difficult problem. How can we program nanoparticles to arrange themselves in 3D into patterns that basically we design on a scratchboard? Luckily, we have existing physical process to rely on, which is crystallization. That is the natural occurring process where order emerges from disorder. So generally speaking, there are two rational ways where you can define a crystallization, either based on bonding or based on packing. So the bonding system kind of originates from traditional chemistry, where directional interactions of atoms are thought of as isotropic centers connected via radially defined bonds. So here I'm going to take the rational design of a cubic diamond lattice as an example. From a bonding perspective, we know each building block has 4 bonds arranged tetrahedrally, so we can create a cubic diamond through connecting tetrahedral clusters, just like how nature creates diamonds using carbon atoms. But just aligning those together is not enough. We also have to make sure that the conformation is staggered. Otherwise, you will get a completely different structure. In some cases, it can be a hexagonal diamond. In other cases, it can be a clathrate, but there apparently should be some polymorphism. On the other hand, you can also try to volumetrically expand each lattice node to find its Voronoi polyhedra, basically growing bubbles at each lattice point or nodes, and their contact facets define the crystal structure as a series of polyhedra. So in this case, you get a Traskis truncated tetrahedron. And the densest packing of this shape will spontaneously get you a pure-faced cubic diamond lattice, because this is the only way that can maximize the packing density and contact efficiencies. So in this sense, bonding seems to be a relatively easier way to understand the crystal structure based on building blocks because it only concerns topological information. Packing actually gives you much more certainties when it comes to inversely creating a lattice. But before everything, we need to establish a design methodology or a predictive framework that serves as the cornerstone for designer colloidal crystallizations. So let's take the simplest shape as examples, platonic solids. The platonic solids are very special ones, and only one can fill the space, which is called hexahedron, or normally we call them also cubes. And their angles are intriguing as well. So for convenience, let's first define angles as a portion to the whole. For example, an angle in 2D can be written as a portion to 2 pi or 360 degrees, whichever you prefer. In fact, we're going to study the solid angle or space angles, which is a portion to the 3D space, or 4 pi in this case. So let's calculate and write down the solid angles of vertices down here. Well, you can see mostly it's a bunch of irrational numbers. But hidden within these irrational numbers, we can actually find some rules. And first is, you may notice that 0.125 is 1/8. That means 8 cube vertices fill the local space. And we can draw this scenario using 8 cubes, surrounding by the center point, which is a red dot. This relationship essentially describes the strong shape complementarity among cubes. And what may be less obvious is that 4 tetrahedra plus 3 octahedra makes exactly 1/2. That means 4 corners of yellow shapes can face snugly with 3 blue shapes, and they're all sharing one vertex. So now we have half of the space filled, and we can fill the other half with 2 choices. If we put a reverse 1 on top, we basically get a cubic close path structure. If we put a parallel one, we get hexagonal structure. And the third rule is actually an approximation that 5 tetrahedra almost equals the corner of icosahedra, and that is almost 1/4. That means 20 tetrahedra can almost occupy one icosahedra, and that is a phenomenon that is quite commonly used to explain the multiple twinned FCC atomic structures. And the final rule is based on 2 and 3. 1 octahedra plus 2 tetrahedra almost makes you 1/5. That means if you put 1 octahedra together with 1 tetrahedra, 1 on top and 1 on bottom, they will locally almost fill 1/5 the space. So essentially, by doing this very simple math, essentially our strategy is to overcome these challenges through identifying geometric complementarities between shapes, which were derived from their solid angles, such that we would know the plausible arrangement based on one or multiple polyhedral shapes. Well, in order to test our geometric designs, we also have to develop and improve the synthesis of a large many of gold nanoparticles with precise shapes and dimension control down to the single-digit nanometer. For example, if you want a batch of gold octahedral nanoparticles with an edge length of approximately 85 nanometers, we can do that in a few hours. So before assembling them together, there's a small caveat that pure DNA only assembles polyhedral nanoparticles when they're sufficiently long. And this is especially bad news for us because we really want to maintain as much geometric features of nanoparticles as possible. But when we introduce a short peg region next to the sticky end of the DNA we're using, we can actually significantly reduce the length required for the DNA to only 10 nanometer, while having all the benefit of a long DNA. Note that here we're designing our DNA sequence to be self-complementary in a way that every nanoparticle can interact with another in the same fashion. So we begin testing with space-filling shapes, which fill the space with 100% efficiency. And at the same time, they also maximizes their DNA hybridization through perfect facet alignment. As a result, it is almost certain that they will always assemble into the corresponding symmetries because they are the Voronoi polyhedra of these lattices. On a side note, because the peg region can tolerate intrinsic polydispersity of the nanoparticles, we can obtain a much larger single crystal domain as compared to the traditional long DNA. Now that we know our DNA works, so we moved on and tested assembly of non-space-filling shapes. So computationally predicting the packing of these shapes are notoriously hard. But with the solid graphs of Voronoi polyhedra that we just gained, our strategy around this challenge is to first drawing the hydrodynamic outlines of our building blocks and to find the most similar Voronoi polyhedra that could mimic these shapes. For example, although the top 2 shapes are very different, yet they all mimic the Voronoi cells of an interlock honeycomb lattice, so that they would both crystallize into the same kind of symmetry. Reversely, because the DNA shell could also alter the nanoparticle outline, so depending on the relative DNA length to nanoparticle ratio, we found that shapes such as octahedron can crystallize polymorphically. With an increase in DNA length, they can crystallize into 4 very different symmetries. Although some shapes cannot fill the space 100%, they can do so with the help of another shape, and we call them complementary pairs. So I hypothesize that this tendency for space filling will actually drive 2 species of nanoparticles to co-assemble. For example, neither cube octahedra nor octahedra is space-filling shapes, but they can fill the space at a 1-to-1 ratio, and geometrically they're named rectified cubic honeycomb. So when we assemble cube octahedra and octahedra nanoparticles with the same edge length at 1-to-1 ratio, they will spontaneously come together and form the lattice with the cubic habit shown here. And a similar space-filling pair is tetrahedra and octahedra, hence the name octet. They form a tetra-octa honeycomb at 2-to-1 ratio. And experimentally, we confirm this hypothesis and produce this tetra-octa honeycomb with octahedral crystal habit. Intriguingly, when we co-assemble octahedra with bitetrahedra, which is basically a compound of 2 face-sharing tetrahedra, we can generate a gyrated tetra-octa honeycomb, which is a hexagonal lattice with hexagonal prismatic habit. So we call this assembly of 1 octahedron with 2 tetrahedra as substitutional strategy where we geometrically compound multiple phase-sharing polyhedra as one single particle, which will assemble as a whole to reduce the symmetry of the original lattice. So in this case, we have successfully reduced the symmetry from the previous cubic close pack one now into a hexagonal lattice. And we can further reduce symmetry too by applying this substitution strategy. It was found when we co-assemble octahedra with decahedra, which is a compound of 5 phase-sharing tetrahedra, we can generate an infinitely repeated 2D Penrose tiling, which is actually a quasi-space-filling lattice. So we have designed and achieved a quasi-space-filling lattice with the fivefold symmetry through shape complementarity alone. Remember that we functionalize all the nanoparticles with the same kind of DNA throughout these binary assemblies, so the co-crystallization of different kind of nanoparticles are purely shape-driven. Without going through them all, I would take the last one as an example to demonstrate how our geometric construction works. So these P1 lattices are co-assembled again by decahedra and octahedra nanoparticles with the same edge length, where I'm showing here the decahedra in red and octahedra in blue. So this lattice can be viewed as, firstly, we make a circle of 5 octahedra, and then we add a decahedra on top of this cluster. You can also add another circle of octahedra on top, and so on and so forth, to make an infinitely repeating column. It is quite worth noting that although vertically, two types of particle fit perfectly, horizontally, there's a tiny gap of 1.47 degrees. But we're able to stabilize this angular gap through flexor Peck region in our DNA. Horizontally, this lattice can be viewed as a series of closely assembled pentagonal prisms. So if we convert every face of this pentagonal prism into a bipyramidal shape while using the center of this prism as one of the tips, so now we can dissect this lattice into another kind, which is basically the decahedral and the octahedral parts. So now, essentially, we have designed and achieved a superlattice based on a predetermined quasi-space-filling construction. So as we're about to learn from Professor Liu's talk, periodic structures are great, but not always the best. So in addition to smart manufacturing of long-range periodic structures, we have always been trying to arrange nanoparticles in a non-periodic fashions. And many says that if you self-assemble a quasi-crystal, that basically means that you have taken an important step to engineering arbitrary structures. But first, let's answer the question, what is a quasi-crystal and how do you make one? Well, many people know the fact that Professor Dan Schechtman proved the existence of quasi-crystal experimentally, but not many are familiar with the fact that quasi-crystalline tessellations, which is a mathematical concept also known as aperiodic tiling, has existed long before 1984. The rules of this game has been very simple. So how can one tessellate the space with no gap left, such as no translational symmetry exists? In other words, how can you fill the space with the patterns that do not repeat itself? So in early 1960, the famous Wang tiling was able to achieve an aperiodic tiling with only 11 of these building blocks. And that was an achievement considering the previous required number, the least number of the building block types is over 2,000. And later in 1970, the most famous Penrose tiling reduced the number to 2 to ensure this aperiodicity was considered a very big achievement. Just as many people thought there's no way you can do it with one shape, it was actually found last year. As you can see, engineering aperiodic patterns, even two-dimensional ones, is far from trivial. It's a very difficult problem. Let alone we're trying to assemble in the three-dimensional space, and they have to be self-assembled into a structure without competing periodic mixed faces. I'm going to skip a lot of stories, so we designed and successfully made one. Using the newly developed DNA-mediated dense crystallization methods, we're able to synthesize a highly ordered, pure-phase solution nucleus superlattice formed by decahedral building blocks. The as-synthesized products have high order of 12-fold symmetry when viewing from the top, and viewing from the side, we can see the signature 1D repeating features. They're basically both characteristics of a dodecagonal quasicrystal. Through imaging the cross-section of the slab of a sample, we found it contained high order of 12-fold symmetry, further confirming our successful synthesis of the first DNA-engineered colloidal quasicrystal. The close examination of this structure is non-trivial, because unlike crystalline structures, the growth mechanism of a quasicrystal relies on inflation rules, which describes how similar patterns can come together and form a larger one in a self-similar way. So after plenty of EM imaging, we're able to successfully correlate each inflation step with our own local structures. Here we simplify the decahedral nanoparticles as a single point, so we can clearly see how these local signature arrangement that we call sigma, Z, and H environments, and we call the first row as the step 1. We can also go up a step and see how S1 cells form S2 cells, and we can do this up to S3, which adequately proves the very high quasicrystallinity of our samples. So the synthesis by design method allows us to access an unprecedented amount of exotic nanoscale features. And we have been actively exploring their physical properties too. In one example, we used geometric principle to guide the synthesis of an open architecture colloidal superlattice and found there's some open channel superlattices, such as this cubic close pack one, or in mechanical engineering field, we call them octet structures, actually exhibit negative refractive indices across near IR region. And that has been a long pursued goal in the field of optical metamaterial communities. In another example, we have conducted a systematic investigation on how these superlattices mechanically respond to a compressive loading condition. We found that simple cubic crystals composed of nanoframes actually have markedly higher specific strength than nanocages and also nanosolid counterparts. And their feature sizes are more than an order of magnitude smaller than the state-of-the-art additive manufacturing works. So as the geometry-inspired programmable self-assembly approach is helping us discover more nanoscale architected materials, more physical properties are being uncovered every day. To make a connection to the beautiful lecture from Professor Wang, here's my perspective on smart manufacturing of architected materials. Over the past 3 decades, numerous ideas and principles we have learned from the macro scale are being introduced to the nano technology. I believe now we're standing at a tipping point where maybe it's time that we introduce some of the knowledge that we accumulated from nano back to the science and engineering of macroscale materials. And this is especially true for architected materials because symmetry can transcend not only architectures, but also through length scales and material constituents. In conclusion, hopefully I have convinced you that geometry is the key to smart manufacturing via programmable self-assembly. And more broadly, this fundamental understanding of geometry-induced organization is easily transplantable to other systems where order arises from disorder. So we foresee these lessons and design rules to be applied for realization of a much more structurally diversified library of materials across different scales, such as atomic, molecular, microscale, even to macroscale materials. Last but not least, I would like to acknowledge the guidance I received from my 2 mentors, Professor Chad Merkin and Professor Chiara D'Areo, as well as the fruitful collaboration experience with Professors Sharon Gloucester, Louis Marson, and Corey Aiden. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and thank you again, Professor Ni, for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Zhou, for the wonderful talk. Every time you mention, oh, this is like guided by simple geometry rules, I'm like, no, this is not simple at all. So you must have some talents in topology and geometry design. And it's very interesting to hear how we can actually generate orders, right, from the disorder, especially in this nanoscale. And I know you are working on something translating everything you found in nanoscale to the more macroscopic scale right now. And thank you again. I mean, we'll leave all the questions to the later panel discussion. And so let me actually introduce our next speaker, because we are now transitioning from ordered structures, right? And how we actually can find the emergent orderness, like from the disordered like material media. And so actually, like I think Professor Liu Liu Ke from the Department of Advanced Manufacturing and Robotics at Peking University will give us a talk about how we can actually learn something from disordered materials and for smart manufacturing. And so Dr. Ke Liu actually also serves as the Associate Director of the Peking University Research Center for Robotics. And he got his PhD degree from Georgia Tech in 2019, and then worked at Caltech for 3 years as a postdoc. And he is awarded for many prestigious awards, such as Sigma Chi Best PhD Thesis Award by Georgia Tech, and the Melville Medal by ASME, and the first prize in Young Faculty Teaching Competition by Peking University. He has published more than 30 peer-reviewed journal papers, including those prestigious ones, including Science Robotics, and Nature Communications, and so on. And so I think his work, his presentation is going to focus on his publication in Science today. Okay, let's welcome Professor Liu for his speech.
Thank you, Xiaoyue, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Alice, for inviting me in the great seminar series. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see it? Can you see my screen?
I can see it now.
Okay, great. Okay, then I'll start. Thank you very much. So yeah, I think it's great that Yifan and Wenjie have already introduced us into the wonderful journey of geometry. I think it's sometimes it really needs, as Xiaoyue mentioned, it really needs some talents to play with geometries. And actually, I just be honest. While I started the work that I want to talk about, which is growth rules for irregular and disordered architected material, is that when I started working on this, we were trying to build a database. But the way to generate this, this tricky geometries, it's really hard. I think there's no way I can exhaust all the types of geometries and not really have that talent. So I've been searching for ways that can automatically generate geometries. And so I found this way of, which is similar to cellular automata that basically governed by simple rules, and you define some building blocks and then let the system to just evolve. So you start with very simple principles, and then the complexity sort of emerge in the process of its self-evolution. And with that, we later find that this being a great approach for designing irregular architected materials, and also helps us to answer a very important question in nature. So the question is, so we've seen all sorts of artificial materials with porous and composite structures, microstructures, and they are, most of them, 99%, they are either periodic or purely random. So purely random examples are foams and maybe concrete. With periodic, we have all these lattices designs that we've just heard about. But it's really amazing in nature that sometimes, we see, for example, your bone, my bone, they certainly have different microstructures, but their function are almost identical. And that's the interesting thing, and right, and the ants here and the ants maybe in the United States, they build similar nests. There's no two nests that looks exactly the same, but they all function the same. So this is really the thing that we are curious about, right? Why there are some universal principles that hide it in the disorderness, which you have randomness, but there are some property being preserved in this random process. And with the recent developments, people actually find that even with randoms, so typically, I think most material scientists and mechanicians would think that special structures comes from special properties comes from special symmetries and periodicity. For example, the famous negative Poisson's ratio design, most of them are with periodic unit cells. But recently there has been some research discovering that you can really get tunable auxeticity through a random lattice, and also tunable anisotropy through this random microstructures. So really opens the design space for architected materials. So, and that leads to what I want to talk about today, is this simple setup that I told you. So the idea is really straightforward. So think about you are just, some ants, you don't have super high intelligence. When you trying to build your nest, you don't draw like human draw a blueprint where I know exactly which brick goes to which spatial coordinates. But I still know that, okay, here are the materials that I have. So some basic building blocks, like jigsaw puzzles, and how I should connect them locally. And then through this process, so you only follow the local rules, right? This is what we call adjacency. So you have building block, and then you put building block together by this adjacency rules. You don't care about how this final structure is going to be, but in the end, a nice structure emerges as a result of the building block and especially the adjacency rules. So here is the process showing in a evolutionary way. So you have building blocks, adjacency rules specified. Think about this like a it's actually similar how how our DNA works, right? You have these many types of different proteins encoded small molecules, right? And then you start to build them by how they should connect locally. This is actually in nature governed by the electromagnetic forces between the atoms and molecules. But here it's just a virtual thing. And let's see how it grows, right? It starts from one place and it starts nucleate, becoming larger and larger. This structure looks totally random and clueless, but later I will show you that we can actually find some principles that determines the property of this structure. And this is purely a symbolic process. So don't think about that I can only design a material like what I showed in the previous letters. In essentially any type of architected material with microstructures, you can decompose it into building blocks and the way they connect. So you can extract geometry and topology separately. And in my growth process, it's only a symbolic evolution that just says, okay, tile A goes here, tile B goes here, tile C goes there, and it doesn't matter how tile A is defined, how tile B is defined, how tile C is defined. It only matters if tile A can be put together with tile B, if tile B can be put together with tile C. So these are the different, different structures, random structure we can get from just these four simple building blocks, where each of them are rich in different components. For example, the first one rich in T-shaped building block, the second one rich in cross-shaped building block, the third one rich in these long beams, and the last one rich in L-shaped building blocks. So some of them look really similar. Like just by naked eye, we can't tell if this one is different from that one. But if we measure their property, it can be quite drastically different. For example, you can have someone that some generated samples that has very large Young's modulus, but nearly 0 Poisson's ratio. But some of them have very low modulus, but quite negative Poisson's ratio. And these results are from numerical simulation. So we found that actually you can see these clusters. And what are these clusters? Actually, the clusters are the random structures. Each dots right here represent the property are evaluated from a sample that is generated from a certain growth rule. and each cluster, they are generated following the same growth loop. So which basically says that you can have 100 different microstructures, but they all behave similarly. They all stay in this cluster. But if you change the growth between the different groups or clusters, right, their property can be quite different. And we also did experiments. So here we just used the simple way of 3D printing, but I believe Wenjie's approach probably is the most natural way to produce this kind of evolutionary disordered architected materials. But anyway, we want to we care about if our simulations are correct, if the clustering behavior we are seeing actually exists. So we did some experiments with so these are how these samples are being compressed. Right? We use a DIC device to track the entire deformation and get the corresponding Young's modulus and Poisson's ratio. So we can see that that's the group 1, right? And this is another group. You can see how they behave differently. This one has clearly a negative Poisson's ratio, while the previous one, when you compress, there's sort of some shear happening at the same time. So I won't play all the videos, but the conclusion is that the experiments that we did aligns qualitatively well with our numerical simulations, but clearly we can see is that for the same type of random structures, right, the ones that are rich in the cross, they actually have a larger relative Young's modulus. But the one with this reentrant T building block, they have a quite negative Poisson's ratio. But what's interesting is that if you want to produce something that has a negative Poisson's ratio, but also relatively large Young's modulus, you take the average. In this space, you can do the you can do this this property in an additive way. We know that property, especially this mechanical properties, are usually quite nonlinear process from a nonlinear function from their geometric design. But here, what is nice that so if you have something that is both rich in the T shape, both and a cross shape, you get something in the middle, some structure, microstructure in the middle that has a relatively low Young's modulus, but relatively high, relatively high Young's modulus, but relatively low Poisson's ratios. That's the interesting part. And by this way, because each time when I'm generating one microstructure, it only takes milliseconds. So it's a really fast process. Then I can build a quite large database within minutes. So for example, here, I think each pi corresponds to the mean property of 100 samples that generated by the same group, basically controlled by the frequency that each building block would appear and also how they should connect. But here for all of them, the connection rule, the adjacency rule are the same. It's only changing the combination of all this building block come together, and we that is shown by the pie plot. Different color indicates the richness of different building blocks. And here we can easily generate a 54,000 samples in an instant. And they actually, by only using these 4 simple building blocks, they cover a quite wide range of properties, right? From positive Young's modulus, positive Poisson's ratio, negative Poisson's ratio, from almost 0 Young's modulus to the maximum Young's modulus that can be achieved at this density. So that's the amazing thing, and actually, it actually reveals a lot about nature that we all made by 24 types of proteins, but the diversity is just amazing. And this can be easily extended to 3D. You just need to specify 3-dimensional building blocks and 3-dimensional adjacency rules, and it just grows similarly from a single building block to an entire piece, right? it's very similar to a nucleation process. So with 3D, we can also build large databases that has properties across a wide range. And actually here we show that how by changing the frequency of appearance of different building blocks, we can achieve elastic properties with even different symmetry, right? Some of them clearly has a tetragonal symmetry, but some of them have higher symmetries. And what's good about this irregular architecture, I think one thing that is really important is they are insensitive to imperfections. Right? So for example, here, if you have a continuum piece of material and you have a hole that is in the size of the microstructures, then for an irregular architected material, it's almost, because it has so many load paths that can bear the load, that can redirect the stress. So when you have a hole in the middle, it will not have stress concentrations like you have in a continuum piece of material. But we have to be careful about the size of the hole. I'm not saying like you have any size of the hole, this would be a principle. The hole has to be in the same order of the microstructure features. And we can also create, some special deformations by controlling the local properties. For example, here we can choose 3 different growth rules with different, selection of the frequency for each building block. And we can create material that are soft with almost 0 Poisson's ratio, material that are soft with negative Poisson's ratio, and material that are stiff. And when you combine them in this way, what is nice is you can grow the entire face in just one growth process, right? Because each region, there's nothing you need to combine them together. It's just a natural way. It's like when you have nucleation process, each region just corresponds to different parts that the concentration of the different molecules are different. It's like that. So a one-run growth process can produce this entire functionally graded piece of material, and this face, when we compress them, it actually smiles. So, but this face that I showed just now sort of relies on some intuition to design. Right? I have to know, these are very ad hoc. We want to find a systematic way that we can determine, okay, where I want, so how should I distribute the different material properties by changing the growth rules at the different spatial locations. So then in collaboration with Jelly Zhang from UIUC, we created this topology optimization framework that first of all, in the topologization, so the macro scale optimization, we control how we should distribute material properties in the space. Right? And then for each property space, we can go to our database that generated by the random growth materials and see which growth rule corresponds to this particular property. And then we can specify that growth rule in that region of space and then start the growth process in one shot to complete the entire microstructure structure with macrostructure, right? This multi-scale structure. And that's nice because many times when we try to combine different types of unit cells, the interface is really an issue. For example, if you want to connect the cross shape with the diamond shape, you may not be able to find the right way of connecting them together. There are actually many papers each year published trying to solve this issue. So how do I do some tricks? How do I do some geometric tricks so that the boundary can be aligned? But here, because all the microstructure are just being defined by this set of limited building blocks, so there's no issue on the interface. It's just a gradually changing frequency of different building blocks, and that leads to different properties. And we can do this for mechanical cloaking. So here, what we do is, so we define a region. So this I may need to explain in detail. So we define a region, and now there's a void in the middle. So if there's no void, what we should see a displacement field is like the first column, right? Now I have a void. What I want to do is I want to have a cloak region around the void, so that when I'm doing the same pulling, it's like the void is not there. So that's the function of a cloak. So we can clearly see if I don't do anything, and I cut a void in the middle, if I pull it, it actually alters the displacement field significantly if you compare the second column to the first column. But now with the optimization tool that we have, we can try to distribute the material properties within the cloak region in a rational way, so that the goal is, so when you look at the region that is outside the cloak region, the displacement field should look almost exactly like the first column. And that is what we can easily verify visually from this figure, right? If you look at what's outside this porous region, on the left there's a straight line of blue, on the right there's a straight line of red, and also in the y displacement, so y direction, we can see the same trend. So that means that our generated microstructure is really doing the function of a cloak to hide that void in the middle. And we can see that in different regions of the cloak device, the microstructure looks drastically different, but they are all generated by the same set of building blocks. And here on the top right, it shows that how the richness of different building blocks can be easily combined together. That basically means that you are creating a functionally graded material. And another example, actually, it's very interesting, is that we can now use this microstructured materials to control the stress distribution within the piece of structure. For example, here we have a simple cantilever beam, and we are pulling it, and then there is any part, we can define arbitrary region inside it, and we want the stress level inside this green region to be a particular value. It's any value that you specify, if it's not impossible physically. So now we can specify the region and specify the stress that we want inside that region. And if we do the topologization, we can find the desired material property that we want at each spatial location that would allow the stress inside that region to be the desired value. And each of the property we can translate into a set of growth rules, and then we can generate the entire complex microstructure. So on the right, that's the result. We can see that we have successfully controlled the stress within these regions to be a uniform green. That's what we want, right? So the specified target stress is 0.28 megapascal. And before we do anything, it's totally different. And from the example on the bottom, which is a more complex shape, inside the region that we want to control the stress distribution, we can see initially if there's, it's just a uniform piece of material. What we get is so here what we want is this I shape. So we define a color code for the stress, right? So at some value it's orange, at some value it's red, and what we want to do is to have now the orange be fully inside this I shape, and the red inside the Peking University logo. So the I is the logo for University of Illinois. So initially, you can see the stress distribution inside this patterns are just, there's no uniform. It's distributed, it's different. But after optimization, we can see magically by tuning the local properties, right? We can change the corresponding stress level within these patterns and enforce them to be the target values. And you may ask, like, why is this important? Why you care about stress distribution? Let me show you a very interesting application that we thought of. Is this may be useful for a tissue support, especially when you have a bone crack. So let me play this video. So the idea is that when we have a fracture in the femur, typically we have a support to help taking all the load. But the thing with our bone is that if there's no stimuli, the growth, the recovery process is very slow. So what we want to do is that we want to design a smart support structure so that most of the load carried on our bone is being taken away by the support, but it leaves a right amount of stress in the crack region to stimulate the growth and recovery of the bone. And this is the growth process. So it's really a growth generated structure to help growth of real human tissues. So this is we can easily 3D print it because all the building blocks are defined to be well connected. So when you 3D print it, there's no flying parts, there's no defects. The entire process is very smooth, and we can create such support structures. Well, we haven't done any animal test, but by numerical simulations, we can show that with this type of support, it takes the majority of the load, but leaves the right amount of forces at the crack region so that you can help it to recover. I think I'll stop. Okay. So that comes to the conclusion part. I think this process since been discovered, it's only a few years. I mean, it was published in 2022, so 2 years, and we haven't been really developing it a lot. And what we would like to see is how it can be further extended, right? There are many different perspectives that you can improve this approach and make it more general and universal. First, I think there's no restriction that the underlying grid has to be this orthogonal straight lines in two directions. There's just no need to grow building blocks on that framework. You can have different general graph in 3D and grow the entire microstructures by defining proper building blocks. And also regarding the growth process, we have already seen in some of the example I showed, if you have a sharp eye, you probably see that there's some emerging hierarchical structures like fractals just naturally appearing in this growth process if you generate a very, very large piece of random structures. And that's an amazing thing that we haven't really looked into it, but I think with more powerful numerical tools, this should be investigated and maybe will give us some surprise. Second is that can we define the adjacency rules and building blocks by some sort of reinforcement learning, right? Now the topic of AI and especially generative AI is becoming very powerful, and that's possible. There are some preliminary results that we did that shows that the building block can actually be learned and the adjacency rules can also be learned. And then I think with the growth process, everything we see it's just a virtual growth in the digital world. But with what Wenjie just showed, I think it's really promising that this disordered architected material can be realized through DNA origami. Instead of, we have to 3D print it. Although it's very suitable for 3D printing because there's no interface issue, there's no connection issue. The whole part is in a very integral state. But I think if we can find a way to self-assemble it, it would be more exciting and maybe create a new type of additive manufacturing approach. Also, I think right now we have only explored the examples I showed today are all linear elastic properties. But actually this type of random structure but have a uniform property, it also happens for wave propagation. It also happens for some fractal properties. It also happens for nonlinear energy absorption, because when you have nonlinear deformation, you can care about energy absorption. And these are some preliminary results we have found that really shows that you can also have uniform and convergent property even from a random process. I think there's a lot to be explored, maybe from the physics end, because I'm not a physicist, but Yifan is, so maybe Yifan can provide some insight into why this process works. With that, I conclude very much, and I'm open for any questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot for Dr. Liu's wonderful talk. And I think we are going to be going into the a panel discussion for questions and answers. And so let me actually introduce our invited panelist for the discussion today. So Professor Wenjie Han from Peking University, and he's right now in the Department of Biomedical Engineering, College of Future Technology. And he received his bachelor's degrees from Huazhong University of Science and Technology in 2012 and the PhD degree in Peking University in 2017. And he actually worked at Northwestern University as a postdoc from the year of 2017 to 2020. And he actually published more than 100 SDI indexed papers, including Nature Electronics, Nature Biomedical Engineering, and so on and so forth. And he's a very high citation researcher in the field of advanced structures such as 3D mesostructures and magnetic structures. And his research has been recognized with many awards, including MIT Technology Review Innovations under 35 Asia Pacific, and also Microsystems and the Nano Engineering Young Scientist Award. So let's welcome Wenjie to join us for the Q&A.
So can we begin to ask questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. First, I would like to thank Xiaoyue for the kind introduction and for the invitation, and also thank Professor Wang, Dr. Zhou, and Professor Liu for the very inspiring and wonderful talks. I learned a lot, and I have many questions. But as the beginning, I think I will ask a general question for all the speakers, because the focus today is on smart manufacturing. And I think all the speakers today, at the beginning of your slides, you mentioned that we want to learn from nature, from the biology. But biology, the structures from biology is multi-scale. Like our human is meter scale, and we have many nanoscale structures like the DNA, the organelle. They are in nanoscale. So my question is, from the manufacturing perspective, is it possible to create a structure that is large scale, but also has a very small feature size? Like Professor Wang has done some work on the very amazing, wearable robotic structures that can wear on the human body in large scale. And Dr. Zhou also created some fancy nanoscale structures. So a question is, can you make a large scale, large area structure, but also has features as in nanoscale? that's a general question for all the speakers. I think that's my first question.
Well, maybe okay. Thanks, Moni, for the very interesting question. So, okay, I think you have a very good point. So, basically, how scalable the manufacturing process is, or you have a design structure with different scales, like hierarchical structures. How could you manufacture it, right? So, I think that the current additive manufacturing technology kind of is trying to address this problem. There are currently like 3D printers that can print into very small, like macro or even nanoscales, like for example, the printers from Boston Microfabrication, or there are like nanoscribe, for example, can print things that is at hundreds of nanometer scale. And well, the question is, if you are printing that high in resolution, then printing a large object takes too long, right? So I think that would be the ultimate question. So I don't have a definite answer on how to address this, because basically, if you want to manufacture things that is highly precise, then it means it takes longer time. If you want to make it in a large area for production, I think that's probably a fundamental question that everyone working in the field of manufacturing should address, right? So some of the like advanced printers is trying to address this, but of course it's not solved ultimately. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe
Thank
some
you.
of the other speakers can add. Yeah.
Yeah, I can. I think I can chime in a little bit about nano features. So regarding this, I think the field of self-assembly is always trying to massively produce these structures. I believe one of the recent works that has that is very inspiring by Professor McFarlane, Robert McFarlane from MIT. So he's basically been doing this. So he would self-assemble a lot of nanoparticles, spherical nanoparticles, and then mold them into a certain shape, and such that it's basically like a metallurgy, but instead of using metallic atoms, he actually uses metallic or other kinds of nanoparticles. So I guess in a way you can achieve that. Nanoscale features defined by self-assembly, and macroscale feature defined by molding, or even in some cases additive manufacturing techniques. I would think that the field is evolving towards that final goal, but it's going to take a while.
Yeah, I think both Yifan and Wenjie talked about very important aspects, and I want to echo on the part on what Wenjie said about self-assembly. That's how nature creates the world. We have to respect this process, that how amazing it is, coming from small molecules to big molecules, and then the hierarchical way of building our body. And it's, I think, well, it's a wild dream that you can think of, maybe in the in some time with now, the tools like the Cas9, that we can modify genes. For example, if you just want to build a toy, is it possible to genetically modify a coral reef and then let it just grow into a shape of a car? I think the power is, the question really is, do we really understand this hierarchical self-assembly process? We understand self-assembly maybe in tens of thousands of particles, but do we understand when there are millions of particles with different shapes? And how is this self-assembly process going to produce? Is there anything amazing will happen? I think there's a lot of things that are theoretically, experimentally need to be understood, and that may lead to a new ways of manufacturing. Like, also maybe I genetically modify a bamboo, and then it just grows into the shape of a torch or something. That, I mean, it's just a wild dream, but I think it's something we should think of.
Yeah, let me okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, let me just add one point to that. So when we talk about this hierarchical manufacturing, right? I think all the like both Ke and Wenjie made a very good point. I think nature or either nature or biology is good for creating structures at the smaller scale, like micro and nano scale, like self-assembly, like the biological structures. Well, the engineering process, like additive manufacturing, is very good at doing things at the larger scale, right? So it's a possibility of combining this. For example, there are now works at printing biological materials, like printing wood, for example, right? These are actually structured at the smaller scale, but you create a printed architecture at a larger scale. So maybe it's a more efficient way of creating these hierarchical architectures. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on the question actually for maybe Ke, because we know also like for this like hierarchical manufacturing, like across the scale mechanics itself is a hard problem too. Like for example, when you are designing this like a supporting structure for the bone, right? So how do you determine the minimum feature of your architected materials in that sense?
That's a wonderful question. Actually, the answer is I don't know. Right now we are showing, but from what we have seen in our experiments and also numerical result is that the finer the features are, the more accurate our prediction is. So the more accurate we can control the stress distribution. Of course, when you have very coarse like feature size, and then it looks more like a structure rather than piece of material. So the answer is the finer the better, but we don't know like what's the limit that we can actually manufacture. Which go back to Monty's question: can we build? Like if I want, for example, the feature in a in maybe 10 nanometers, then can I build this large of support that is in the range of 20 centimeters large?
I see. So you think the design rule will apply across the scale also? Because you mentioned also in the end that you are going to discuss, you are going to explore the fractal pattern, which is actually a hierarchical design rather than the uniform design. So
yeah, in terms of, so that leads to different properties. And in terms of linear elastic properties, what we have seen is the larger patch you have, the more uniform it appears overall, like the property will actually converge. I think for some properties, especially like wave propagations, and also it depends on the growth rules that you specify. With the current growth rule, everything is local. The order is it's just between two building blocks. If you have a longer range adjacency rule, maybe 2 blocks away, what should be the next one? I think there are lots of interesting patterns could emerge from this process. It's because we have seen, I think Steve Wolfram, so the guy who created Mathematica, he has lots of work into the cellular automata. And he has shown that just by simple rules that you can create very complicated patterns, and also the famous game of life with simple rules of evolution. And then there are many different possible ways that the system can stay. It's either sometimes it's become periodic, sometimes it becomes just dead, like all living cells are dead. So I think it depends on the rules that you specified. It's up to us to explore interesting phenomena. What we see now is like sometimes we can see some clustering of a certain building block with each other in the region. So there's definitely some hierarchical structure, but right now in the concern of linear elasticity, this sort of phenomenon doesn't matter that much. But for other properties, maybe fracture, it may play a role.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
Wenjie, you said you have many questions. Yeah.
yeah. Can I follow up another quick question for Ke? So using your design rule, you can design the random structure with many different kinds of mechanical properties. So my question is, so for those mechanical properties, are those properties can only be achieved using your random structure, or using some conventional periodic or lattice structure, they can achieve similar mechanical properties. So in short, can you design, using your design rule, can you create a material that can never be achieved using conventional approaches?
The answer is for all the property that we created and have seen so far, you can achieve it with the periodic designs. I don't know in terms of finding extremal properties being disordered is good, or it depends on the property you care about. For especially for mechanical properties, I think the extremal properties are usually maybe periodic. That's just my personal intuition. But random structures helps you to understand like what is the key to create to lead to a certain property. Because when you have a periodic, for example, unit cell, there's many things there, but you cannot tell which is important, which is not. Geometric features. But in a random structure, if things sort of cancels out, and then what's left is the most important. But so far, I don't know. I don't know if some extremal properties can be found with this disorder, the growth process. We haven't seen any yet.
Thank you. So Xiaoyue, can I go ahead to ask other questions, or
Absolutely.
will you? Yeah.
Please go ahead. Yeah. We'll
I think
chime in
maybe
whenever
due to the time limit, we need to switch to the other speakers. Although I have another question for Ke, but we can discuss later if we still have time. So I have another question for Wenjie. So I think Ke at last mentioned that we can use AI to design some metamaterials. So for your case, are you considering to use AI to guide the design of your nanoscale assembly? From your talk, I think you must be very talented, right? So, but AI probably sometimes AI is also very clever in some other cases. So are you considering combining AI with your talent in topology and geometry to create new structures in nanoscale?
Yeah. Thank you for the great question. I'm sure AI is much smarter than me. Any kind of AI, that was their design purpose. And the short answer is yes. So especially in regards to self-assembly, I believe. So what I've been demonstrating are mainly inorganic nanoparticles with basically they are nanocrystals themselves. So there are certain bounds in basically how you can design them in a certain shape. So basically, if you want a random polyhedra, it's basically very challenging, if not impossible, to synthesize. However, I think also Ke mentioned in his talk that recent technologies in DNA origami can give you rather arbitrary shape. So I believe if that is where AI can come in. So basically, you can try to inversely compute what kind of shape you would need to self-assemble into a certain pattern, be it periodic or aperiodic or even random patterns, and you can basically synthesize that DNA origami, design a DNA origami by AI, and therefore, basically, I think the entire process, there's no reason that AI cannot replace us. I just, we need to work harder I think working out all the fundamental mechanisms, such as, for example, the guiding rules. So I would say we're taking back baby steps, but eventually, I believe AI would be the final solution.
And I think at least for now, I think humans are still more creative than AI.
Well, that is a philosophical question, and yeah. So in some regards, yes, because AI is as of now, a three-dimensional AI model creation, I think is still a challenge, but hopefully GPT-5 can help us get there.
I think basically like a human plays a role for interpretable results, right? So for example, like if you use the AI to actually generate some rules, like usually you lose the how to say, like a simple intuition about what's going on. But you probably get a very nice result. So that's a kind of like a trade-off, and probably like a co-design is the way to go for the future design or design problem in this case. Yeah. Yeah, so sorry, please
can
go ahead.
I continue?
Yeah, definitely.
I have a question for Yifan. So you have a many design on some wearable robotic materials, and for those materials, sometimes you need to actuate those materials. You need to make it move. So a question is, for those wearable applications, I think if you want to make soft robotic materials, the traditional way is to use a hydraulic or pneumatic way to actuate those soft robotics. But in that case, the pump will be probably relatively large if you want to actuate a very large scale materials. Although we have micro pump, but for those large scale materials, probably you need a larger pump. So in other alternatively, we have other actuation approaches like electric or magnetic actuation. So what's your opinion in those actuation approaches that can be exploited onto those wearable robotic materials? So can you share your opinion on this?
Okay, thanks, Moni. Very good question. So regarding the actuation, it's always challenging to find the best actuation method that is lightweight and wearable and power efficient, right? So currently, as you mentioned, the pneumatic devices or hydraulic devices are quite commonly used. And another thing is that actually, from our research, we do find that the pneumatic pumps, you can find very small ones. You can find very small pumps that can be powered by AA batteries. So the whole thing can be like 200 to 300 grams that can be put into a pocket. So actually, you can find portable air pump. It's just the matter of like how much power it provides, right? But for devices on the body, typically we could find it's going to be enough. So what I will say that although it sounds to be a very old technology, pneumatic actually works pretty well. So the other alternative that is also quite traditional is tendon driven. Tendon driven is basically a tendons driven by motors, right? So surprisingly, you can also find motors that is lightweight that can be driven by small batteries. So it's also just a matter of how much power it can provide. So for these two, I think you can find portable solutions for these two. But I think one of the very promising ones is electrical. So basically either dielectric or electrostatic actuators. I think these are quite promising solutions because it requires the drawback is it requires some higher voltages like kilovolts or 10 kilovolts, but that we can solve now using some voltage amplifiers, which is portable. And also because although it uses very high voltage, the current is very small or the power is small. So although it sounds very high voltage, but actually it's quite safe. So I think the electrical actuation is also another good alternative. I think that's also a quite hot area that a lot of people in robotics is working on this electrical, like dielectric elastomer actuators or electrostatic actuators. I think that's a very promising field right now. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for your answer. I think electrostatic is also very useful in some small scale actuators because the power consumption is really low because there's almost no current.
Yeah, and it has a very nice scaling relationship too, right? So it doesn't scale with the size, I mean, that much, such as like magnetic force will scale down like significantly. I mean, when you push the size down. Yeah. Okay. Well, so I think we are probably on time to actually end the discussion. Thank you so much, Mondi, for all the wonderful questions. For all our
Thank you, Xiaoyue,
speakers.
for the invitation.
Yeah, for sharing.